This week on the Eldritch Lorecast.
Oh, we're vamping? All right. Who wants their blood drained?
Hey!
I did it.
Sync your privilege.
One day my voice will be back and I'll use it to destroy you all.
The good news is you're halfway to Katharine Hepburn.
Sorry, what was the question? We were too distracted by your baritone.
Because I hate most other D&D giant lore. It's very, boring and on the nose and flat.
Path of the dad bod.
Yeah, exactly. I'm writing that down.
I would like to point out that they use the term Oathbreaker, not Pact
Sorry, did I
Breaker,
say Pact?
which supports my theory of Gandalf as a paladin.
All that and more right now.
Hello, everybody, and no, that would have clipped. I'm going to back up a little bit. 3, 2, 1. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of the Eldritch Lorecast, the 99th episode of the #1 podcast in all the realms. That's right, this is the 99th episode, the penultimate episode, if you will, of the Eldritch Lorecast. Not that episode 100 will be our last, but you get the point. My name is Ben Byrne, if this is your first episode, and I am joined, as always, by Dael Kingsmill, Shawn Merwin, James Hake, and James. If you were a patron of a warlock, what powers would you give that warlock?
What unlimited powers would I give my warlock? I think that I'm already a patron of some sort of warlock, and that is the great elder god of game design. Its powers include obsessive detail over minutia that only editors will recognize. Waking up in a cold sweat at night over statistical derivations that no one but people on Reddit will realize, and generally having a grand old time playing games all the time.
Great. I feel like I may be one of your warlocks indeed, wandering around.
Probably I would go with bad hips and the ability to balance a small child on one hand and scare adults. It's a rarely used but super fun talent.
Yeah, okay. All right. Yeah, no, I see. As in, like, you're scaring the adults by balancing the child in one hand, or you're, like, going rah with the other hand?
No, the child is enjoying this as it stands on my hand and I, do this.
Oh, you can do that.
And it's tipping, and it's sort of like juggling, but it's only one thing.
I would probably imbue powers based on festivity. I like to think that I embrace any festive occasion that comes my way. So something about, I don't know, decorating or pulling together costumes at the last minute.
Speaking of warlocks and patrons, Tal'Dorei Reborn has come to D&D Beyond. I'm not sure which one's the warlock and which one's the patron in this particular transaction. But the big breaking news of last week was, because we always have breaking news here, yes, Tal'Dorei Reborn, which is technically a third-party supplement because it was published not by Wizards of the Coast but by Darrington Press, has become fully integrated on D&D Beyond. James Hake, as someone who worked on that book, how do you feel?
Yeah. So I was one of the lead designers of Tal'Dorei Campaign Setting Reborn. It's a revamp of a book that Matthew Mercer and I co-designed in 2017. It's an unbelievable feeling to see that book in its new and revamped form make its way to D&D Beyond. Not just because it has such personal significance to me, but because that book is really good. That book, I mean, it's got, I think it's 9 new subclasses, all of which I think are very fun, from the path of the Juggernaut Barbarian that's all about hurling people around on the battlefield with big sort of anime weapon hits, to ones that are tied deep into Critical Role lore rather than just sort of Critical Role big bombastic flavor, right, like the previous. But there's a Moon Cleric that focuses on the 2 moons of Exandria that Campaign 3 is focusing on right now, and ones that were actually used in Critical Role that have appeared on D&D Beyond in the past in a more unofficial capacity. I have lots of stories about that I can't tell from back when I was working at D&D Beyond. about the sort of internal politics of those subclasses, but they've been revamped. They've been taken from sort of Matt's own homebrew back in Campaign 2 when Bo was a Path of the Cobalt Soul monk and Ford was an Oath of the Open Sea paladin. They've been through the ringer of playtesting. They've gone through, I think Cobalt Soul has been through something like 5 revisions by the point that it appeared in the Tal'Dorei book. And they're fun to play. And that's not even touching on all the monsters, on the new spells, on the Gazetteer that has been updated to be concurrent with Campaign 2, all the sort of where are they now bits on Vox Machina. I mean, this is a huge love letter to Critical Role, but it's also way more than that. It's something that, honestly, I think that if you like D&D flavored fantasy, this is a book that you just want to have. The quest hooks are inspiring. The subclasses are inspiring. The monsters are eminently usable. The factions are honestly a great sort of beginner's guide to creating factions in your world, because we go into a little bit of detail on the NPCs and on what the factions want on the whole and where their conflicts are. And I don't know, man, you set me off. I could ask me specific questions. I'll go on the whole episode. I'll lead up the whole episode talking about this thing.
And we would like that.
Has anybody gone on to D&D Beyond? I've had a little bit of a poke at it. It is, as far as I can see, and as far as they've promised, like fully integrated into D&D Beyond. You can create a character as long as you have Critical Role content turned on. You can create a character, and it's, all the abilities are there if you want to use them, if you've purchased the book, obviously. The monsters are searchable in the Monster Compendium kind of side of things.
I will answer that because we had that discussion earlier today. It looks like all of that can happen. There might be a special button you need to push, and it's called something strange. It's called like sync your privilege or something, like sync your something. Yeah, it's really weird. It's a bizarre thing. But even if you buy the book, you have to do that. But once you sync it, then it becomes populated with all the other content that you can use. So yes, it's there. You may have to fiddle around a bit to get it, but it's there.
Yeah, it also comes with a big disclaimer, which I kind of hope, I understand why it's there, but I kind of hope it goes away at some point. And it's basically anytime that I've clicked on a spell or a monster, which is what I've predominantly looked at the bottom of the description is a big disclaimer that says, this is third-party content. This is not, official written by Wizards of the Coast content. And I understand that it's there to clarify that, you might need your DM's permission because your DM might not be across this if you want to use features from here. But it's just kind of, I don't know, ugly. That's my only complaint about it, really, I suppose.
Well, this is another interesting quirk of third-party content. It's because when we were making this book, Darrington Press and the leads of this book, we talked a lot about certain things that are core to D&D that we would not want to include because this was published under the OGL. This was all pre-OGL crisis, right? And so Critical Role is known for really popularizing some groups, some species like the Goliath and the Furbolg and stuff like that. And so you'll notice that there are some character species in this book that avoid their SRD names. Even ones that are in the SRD, like the Dragonborn, we opt not to use that phrase because, sometimes Critical Role wants to get away from the baggage of the D&D OGL. So you'll see Dragon Blood in here. You'll see Half Giants instead of Goliath. You'll hear Elemental Ancestry instead of Genasi. And
this was just quickly. This was something that I noted with Tabaxi. There's it's Katari, I think. And the reason I know this, the only reason I know this, is because Daggerheart has Katari as its one of the character cards that's displayed in some of the photography that people got at Gen Con, which is a completely different conversation. But it was something that I noted that I don't think we mentioned last week, which was that Daggerheart seems set as its kind of vanilla setting in Tal'Dorei, I would assume. But anyway, this is a separate conversation. Go on, continue.
Well, that's exactly the sort of thing that's going on here, right? Because you're seeing Critical Role attempting to establish itself as a unique entity more than it has in the past. Except now we're also on D&D Beyond now. So this is something that I think people will have to navigate moving forward when creating third-party content. Maybe not in quite the extent as this, because Critical Role is so monolithic. But I can see why D&D Beyond might want to be a little bit like, hey, just remember, you're not abiding by the same sort of assumptions that stuff published by Wizards is doing. In fact, people may be trying to break them.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And a moment ago when I bemoaned the third-party kind of label, I think there does need to be something, I suppose, because I'm thinking of, and I think this might have been what Shawn was about to crack into, the idea of other third-party publishers publishing on D&D Beyond another setting like, I don't know, just Shooting in the Dark here, Grimhollow, perhaps, on D&D Beyond. Which is trying to do a very specific thing in terms of creating a dark fantasy atmosphere, which might preclude the use of certain player species or certain other options that feel antithetical to what the setting, the stories that the setting is trying to tell. I know they tried this a little bit with Dragonlance, where they put prerequisites onto.
Well, that was. That was what I was going to ask. I was going to ask if anyone knows, because you turn those settings on for what content you want to include on D&D Beyond. But this is a nightmare. But does anyone know if the prerequisites are baked into the code?
Well, Matthew Colville, thank you for joining us on this episode.
I was going to say Barry White.
I think you sound great, Dale. Don't let them get you down.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Sorry, what was the question? We were too distracted by your baritone.
She was asking if the prerequisites were baked into the actual software. That's a great question.
I don't think so. Shawn, do you know the answer? I don't think so from remembering back to Dragonlance.
I don't have an answer to. I have not delved that deeply into it.
I'm going to make a character in the background while you keep talking, and I'll come back with the answer.
Okay, that sounds like an excellent assignment. Because, yeah, I remember thinking when those Dragonlance kind of prerequisites came along that said, like, you must be playing in a Dragonlance campaign to use this feature or whatever, that was a great inclusion that was very easily ignored and perhaps could and should be ignored by players and GMs who are playing in a more generic setting or a non-Dragonlance setting that want to use that content, you know? So maybe a good answer would be a toggle that a DM could switch on and off that would bake it into the software, or maybe the answer is just to talk with your players, as it invariably is.
Yeah, the question for me is whence from here, I think, is not just in terms of will there be third-party content, but how long will it take, if there is, to incorporate that into the D&D Beyond infrastructure as seamlessly as the other content? Because programmatically, that's not easy to do. And then what options, how do you rule out that? Do you have to uncheck every single thing that a third party bring in or leave out? And it becomes a bit of a nightmare. So I was just surprised. I wasn't surprised at the content that was there, because I think that was probably somewhat not already in the system, but sort of system adjacent anyway. But, bringing in completely new content that doesn't quite fit into not the genre, but in terms of the rules, something that has additional rules like Grimhollow with transformations.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking.
That's a whole new level that would need to be added. So that's where my interest is piqued, tangentially to that it's Critical Role that's getting their great content up there.
Yeah,
and this is something that has somewhat frustrated me since the beginning of D&D Beyond. I might have even griped about this on this very podcast in some previous episode, but D&D Beyond has this habit of taking every drop of content made for 5th edition, first party, and now third party with this introduction, and just kind of throwing it all into the same bucket. And there's some toggles here, like Eberron can be toggled on and off on your character sheet specifically. Critical Role, Rick and Morty. So it's not like they haven't thought about this a little bit. But when you're creating a campaign with a specific feel, as a GM, it can be a little bizarre for all of a sudden the Acquisitions Incorporated spells to show up in there. And the thing is, all of this content that fills different genres of D&D play is fantastic for that genre, but it can be a little bit challenging when you are running, a Grim Hollow game and, Jim's magic missile shows up. And a character is like, ooh, the mechanics of this seem pretty nice. I think I'll add it in. But it's like intentionally designed with a more lighthearted flavor. Or, there's feats only for dragon-marked houses. And let's say you're a first-time player playing in a game that's distinctly not Eberron, a bog-standard Forgotten Realms D&D game. And you're looking through your list of options. And you've got to wade through, when you're choosing your species, all of these dragon-marked sub-races. And you're just like, what is this? I think I'll choose this. And all of a sudden you get to, your Adventurers League game or something where people really, really care about that. You're like, oh, well, you're a Sybaris dragon marked. Don't allow that here. And it's like, well, goodness sake.
I think I've told.
Yeah.
I think I've told the 2-second story before where I was playing with a regular group. And then they were like, let's do a high-level one-shot. It wasn't even that high level. I think it was like they were playing at 3rd or 4th in the regular campaign, and we went to 7th level for a one-shot or something. And one of them rocked in with D&D Beyond main character, and he's just like, yeah, my Vorpal sword. I was like, what do you mean you have a Vorpal sword? He's like, yeah, I just hit equipment, and I scrolled down, and it was in the options, and that seemed cool, so I grabbed that. And I was like, oh, okay, I see. Something has gone wrong here, is that it's kind of given you everything.
Speaking of which, I have now proven it. The prerequisites are listed, but don't actually require those prerequisites in order to add them.
Yeah, and this to me, right, D&D Beyond, as magnificent a tool as it is, was made without any support from Wizards, right? They made this thing, Curse, before they, through a series of acquisitions, became a Wizards first-party tool. Made this thing, pitched it to Wizards, got third-party support, and was off to the races. And so a lot of this is, building the ship while it's sailing, putting the train tracks down while the train's running. And so stuff like this simply, it's never been a high priority because the high priority is always get the next book on there by launch day. And like, that's a huge undertaking. It's an enormous undertaking, especially getting everything synced up, working, communicating from the compendium to the character sheet. So things like, really high quality search functionality, I just don't, it's never been able to be a high priority, but we're reaching the point where it's becoming an actual problem.
A couple folks have asked via email and YouTube and various places, like, when will Grim Hollow be on now that the door has been opened for you officially? And the answer is we don't know. We'd, I personally would love to see Grim Hollow on D&D Beyond, especially because, having those third-party options on there, whether it's, Grim Hollow or from Cobalt Press or wherever it happens to be from, means that you don't have to create a character that's half on D&D Beyond and half not if you're choosing a subclass that's from a third-party supplement. So yeah, I would love to, but we have absolutely no idea on timelines on any of that stuff, if and when it happens. But I think, Shawn, you've brought up an incredibly salient point, which is, how do you, will that include things like transformations, advanced backgrounds, advanced weaponry and equipment? Is it worth it for D&D Beyond to create bespoke, there's that word, everybody was saying take a shot for the word bespoke on the last episode. I don't know if it was just me saying it or everybody, but is it worth it for D&D Beyond to build specific tools to be able to tackle those sort of new mechanics that are introduced through third-party products. Who knows? Maybe not. We'll find out.
To answer a question that just came up, Ben, when did they send those emails? Those emails have been coming in since D&D Beyond started. We get emails weekly. Any company that makes D&D products get those emails from fans saying, why aren't you on D&D Beyond? And the answer up until now was, because we're not wizards.
Mm-hmm.
And now with this, the question becomes a little more salient, but business moves at the speed of business and technology moves at the speed of technology, and you cross business with technology, it moves very slowly. So we will hope and we will see, but it's not in the offing anytime soon.
The question that I have is, what does this mean? Let's assume, and this is going into a little bit of speculation territory, I suppose, but assuming that other third parties do find their content making its way onto D&D Beyond. What does this mean for other third party apps such as 5e Nexus, even Roll20, places like that are trying to build their D&D Beyond like solution, with part of their strategy being that they will try to find a way to work third party content into that offering? Does this give D&D Beyond a greater advantage, being that it's a place where probably most of the user base already is, and then if they have no reason to shift elsewhere?
Yeah, it's a pretty big advantage, I would say. I would say that most people who are using third-party content are also using some, if not all, of the first-party content as well. I think it's a rare group indeed that uses just the SRD and Tal'Dorei Reborn, or and Grim Hollow, and the Midgard World Book from Kobold Press, or something like that. Usually, groups like that, in addition to the new stuff in Heroes of Midgard or the Grim Hollow Player's Guide, will also be using stuff from Xanathar's and Tasha's and Monsters from Volos and all of that stuff. And it's a hard sell to be half on D&D Beyond and half on Demiplane or something like that. Honestly, the critical mass is a huge value multiplier. So if D&D Beyond can get them, then I think a lot of people will move 100% over to D&D Beyond just for the convenience of it.
Cool. Dael Kingsmill recently played in a Gen Con live play. I just wanted to shine a little bit of a light. The video on demand, or the YouTube video, whatever it's technically called, is now on YouTube if people want to go find it. I don't know if it's still on the D&D Twitch channel. It might be. How was that? Was that fun? That seemed fun. That seemed like a good time.
It was really, really, really fun. And I was also stoked to see, when I looked back at the Twitch VOD, how many people from my community and this community showed up for the live stream and were keeping the chat populated. It really warmed my heart. And it's really nice seeing them pop up again in the YouTube comments. I just feel very, very supported by everybody, and it makes me happy in my heart. Don't laugh at me, Joey.
That's a smile of pure love.
One day my voice will be back and I'll use it to destroy you all.
Well, the good news is you're halfway to Katharine Hepburn without even trying.
Oh.
Yeah, so that's good.
Oh,
that's good.
There you go.
Great.
Yeah.
Good.
There's also a little bit of some other British actress in there somewhere, but my brain hasn't quite pegged it yet. But do you think that your character, what was your character's name because there was a very specific characterization.
Okay, so the character name was Snorri S. Turleson, which is Erica Ishii is a bad influence. Erica came in and said, I don't know anything about my character, except I know that they're called Min for Cool, which is, of course, a play on Finn McCool. And so I retaliated by calling my character Snorri S. Turleson, which is a play on Snorri Sturluson, who wrote the Edda that we're kind of most familiar with from Norse mythology. But I based my character on, and you've all heard this story, I based my character on a guy from San Diego named Chad, who is like a surfer philosopher guy. and it was just such a delight to be able to sort of peg my character to just one of the most bizarre people I've ever met.
Yeah, great. And we can see the result of doing that voice is playing out now.
Yeah, it really worked out well for me. It worked out great.
Yeah, good. The VOD for that, or the edited video at least, is on the D&D YouTube channel. I can't speak for Twitch, but you might be able to find it there. And it was promoting at Gen Con the release of Bigby's giant book of Glorious Giants, the official title. That's out now, as far as I'm aware, or at least a lot of people seem to have gotten their hands on it. I have not. Has anybody here? I hear good things. People have said that they like it, that I have spoken.
I looked through it at a game store just the other day, walking through Seattle. Found a game store I'd never been into, walked around, found the new Bigby's book. It's great. It's honestly a real shame for a lot of reasons that the AI art scandal rocked that book right as it was coming out, because frankly, a lot of that art is gorgeous. A lot of that human-made, handcrafted art is beautiful. And the content it accompanies is really nice too. There's a lot of good stat blocks in there. I really like the new barbarian subclass that's in there. And honestly, so to go back to Tal'Dorei Reborn, my favorite giant lore of all time is the giant lore in Tal'Dorei Reborn, because I wrote it, because I hate most other D&D giant lore. It's very, boring and on the nose and flat. But Bigby's is making me change my mind on that. I really like the giant lore in that book.
I really like it too. I want to give a huge shout out to James Wyatt, who has worked on some of my favorite books, worked on Theros as well. But when I was sent the sort of preview copy in order to make characters for the game, the first thing I saw was this epic, this saga, quite literally, of one of the characters in the lore. And it was written using the poetic techniques of the Poetic and Prose Edda from Norse mythology. And I was so excited. I lost my mind. It's all alliteration. It's really clever. Mythologically speaking, it really scratched that itch in my brain, and I really enjoyed it. So James Wyatt, what a guy.
In 2019 maybe this was 2018. Yeah, so not the stream I met you at, Dael, not the Avernus stream, but at the Waterdeep stream. I went down there with D&D Beyond, and I found myself in the company of Jeremy Crawford in a hotel bar late at night. He and Todd Kenrick and I and a handful of other people were hanging out together. And Jeremy Crawford, if you haven't heard him talk about this in talks before or anything like that, but he is a very religiously minded guy. I believe he has a master's in theology. In addition to his own religious upbringing. And he can read written ancient Greek. And so can James Wyatt. And I have heard, and I don't know if they're joking about this.
I'm so jealous.
I don't know if they're serious about this, but they've said their retirement plans are to create a new translation of the Bible together. Because James Wyatt is an Episcopalian minister as well. And I pray for the day that two, D&D masterminds, editorial masterminds who can read ancient Greek go back and retranslate the Old Testament, because some of Jeremy's stories about translation of the Bible over the years are fascinating. I'm sure James has just as many saved up there. So anyway, James White's a fascinating guy.
Oh, no, they said hold up like branches, not snakes. That's completely different.
What I noticed as I was reading through, I went to the credits section, and this looks like an early example of what Wizards is trying to do, which is not use freelancers, which is to use the staff that they've hired.
Right.
And so if you go to the credits, you will see the writers, developers, editors, and so on are all Wizard staff. And I think that will get us closer and closer to having products that are more, not necessarily better designed, better developed, but more coherent, more, because when you use freelancers, you're pulling in from so many different people. Sometimes it's hard for the lead designer, the lead developer, the lead editor to get all that together in a way that is as coherent as this book is. So I think that has a lot to do with it. And the scale of the rules is less. The scale, you don't have 14, 20 subclasses. You have 2. You don't have 15, 20 backgrounds. You have 2. Or I'm sorry, I think there's just 1 subclass, right? And then 2 backgrounds. But anyway, that helps focus things. It puts more and better eyes on everything. So that may have a little bit to do with it. But I agree that it's a great source for DMs and players who want to play in that giant themed campaign.
A couple of things that kind of I want to spring off there. First of all, is like the use of more in-house staff as opposed to freelancers. From an industry perspective, who knows how it will affect the flow of labor and jobs and all of that sort of stuff. But hopefully, what it would see if that becomes a thing is more permanent kind of job secure positions for people that are able to take advantage of like a permanent position. But from a more book perspective thing, it's interesting that you say that, because I look at a book and whenever it has like only 1 subclass or something in it, I'm kind of like, like where's all the other subclasses? This seems like one I could skip, because it seems like there's not really much meat on that bone. But having it reframed in kind of like, no, this is a lean product. This is, only providing what it needs to and nothing more than that. I think is maybe a bit of a better way to go about it than a scatter shot of a Tasha's style. Like, here's literally everything, here's some subclasses and this and that, and it's going to completely change the way the game is played from this point going forward. I don't know if there's more of a conversation in that, but that was just an interesting reframing for myself.
Yeah, well, we already have Tasha's, we already have Xanathars, we already have those books. So I'm happy to see a book that says, this is for giant stuff. Use it for giant stuff. The next book will be something different, and we will have different things for that. But I like going at it thematically, as opposed to, like you say, the scattershot approach of trying to entice people to buy it when it's maybe not necessarily well thought out, well play tested, well designed, developed, well edited, etc.
Well, that's the thing is, like, let's say that they did a fiend book or an undead book or something like that next, and we don't, one D&D is probably their next big meal on the ticket agenda aside from Planescape later this year. But you're right. It kind of stops that need to be like, all right, so let's say we're doing a book of fiends. Well, a warlock is easy because we can create some packs that kind of might peg into specific warlock subclasses or types of warlocks. And maybe a wizard is not too difficult, or a sorcerer with a fiend kind of heritage could be something that's easy to do. How do we make a fiendish fighter or a fiendish range, and they're trying to bend the theme to fit every subclass. Sometimes you're a little bit like, that feels like they were really scratching their noggin to figure out how, this theme fit this class, which doesn't play in these waters typically, specifically. So, it's probably worth not trying to bend every class to fit every type of book that they're going to release.
Well, and I want to talk a bit about that, about forcing things into niches that don't exist. Because back in May of last year, we saw Unearthed Arcana for this book. And here's the blurb. In today's Unearthed Arcana, we explore character options related to the magic and majesty of giants. This playtest documents reviews the Path of the Giant Barbarian subclass, which was in the book, the Circle of the Primeval Druid subclass, which was not in the book, the Runecrafter Druid subclass, which was not in the book, and a collection of new feats, which I don't remember whether or not they were in the book. But clearly, they had more than one giant subclass idea. And what happened is people didn't say they liked them. They had some themes that they wanted to go with, and the only one that passed muster is the only one they published in the book. And I think that, even if it does seem like thin pickings when you get to the bookstore, I think that's ultimately the way to go. I've seen so many, and I've done this, where it's like, all right, we have to fill every slot. And you come up with some real garbage sometimes when you do that.
I remember back in the day receiving the Unearthed Arcana and talking about it, and I remember not being very excited. But with the transformation of the rune carver into a character background, I found it delightful to play with. Thank you. I believe Mackenzie Diamas was one of the major designers on that. And it was really, really fun, and it was cool to be able to apply it to different contexts and think about what kind of characters might have that background.
I just want to shout out Mac real quick here because, she's just a junior or a mid-level designer of Wizards right now. She was the person who made me realize that I'm no longer the baby in the room doing D&D stuff because she's even babyier than I am. And she's just fantastic. I think I hired her for her first D&D job doing stuff at D&D Beyond, or one of her first. And she has consistently knocked it out of the park every single time. And people better put some respect on her name because she kicks ass.
Folks speak. I got to meet her briefly at Gen Con, but even other folks that I spoke to spoke incredibly highly of her talent as a designer. Speaking of kicking goals, if somebody wants to kick a goal into our email address, Dael Kingsmill, where would they send that email to? Yeah, I'm picking on you. Yeah.
They would send it to podcast@ghostfiregaming.com.
Great. Perfect. Thank you. That's
Thanks
podcast at ghostfiregaming.com.
Really appreciate it.
If you
I'll
didn't
remember this.
Yeah.
I will remember this.
Oh, that's what that was.
This
at the
is
top
the
of my
thing that will
vision,
make you
was
angry.
This is the rage.
Well, somebody being Sasha sent an email asking if stakes should be clear to the players in a campaign. If a party choice or something big is going to affect the campaign in a very large way, should this be made clear to the players on a meta level? Or should the GM only give info in-world and when asked for, and let the characters have to cling or have to deal with the consequences of that?
I think it goes back to the old session 0 question of what do your players want? If what is about to happen is going to change that social contract that you made, then it sort of is incumbent upon you as the game master to say, if you do this, not just the story will change, but the game will change. Are we comfortable with blank? We've been playing a game set in Fae and it's been light and airy. If you go through this portal, now we're going into a grim place. Is this okay with everyone? If everyone's okay with it, then great. Off you go. If not, then you can revamp, retool, and reset and not do that. If your players love that sort of twist and you know they do, then you don't need to play that through because you know what they're up for, you know what they're into, and you can safely go in that direction without any sort of warning or any sort of discussion.
This is why I'm a huge proponent of Session 0. And I've put down my thoughts on this in some of the upcoming stuff out of Ghostfire Gaming. The Raider's Guide to Valaka book has a lot of info on Session 0. And it's especially relevant there because it's Grim Hollow, it's dark fantasy, right? It's good to get all your ducks in a row before going into something that can have pretty emotionally intense stuff. But one thing that's worth noting about Session 0 is that despite the name, you can have a Session 0 whenever and as many times as you want. It's an expectations setting thing. When you break expectations, it's sometimes a good thing. It's sometimes an exciting thing. But if you break them too far, if you go way off in a place that's unexpected, then you really risk alienating people. And when you risk alienating your audience, and when your audience is also your players, then you run into trouble. See, I think generally speaking, if you're a creator, you should challenge your audience's expectations constantly. But that's for an audience that's consuming. Put a big surprise in your movie. That's awesome. You may be defining a new artistic tradition at that point. But your players are your collaborators as well as, being an audience. And so, respect them, respect their creative vision as well as yours.
There's a degree to which we expect session 0 to be something that happens at the beginning and then not again. You've set all the expectations, so you have to follow that to the letter. But of course, those things can shift over time, and players can discover things that they are or are not happy to play through as you go. So I think that we end up with this kind of misleading concept of we have to figure it all out before we start playing.
Mm-hmm.
It's just good to set a sort of ground zero with session 0. But from there, just keep talking to your players. I think, I'm a big proponent of meta discussion. I very rarely have situations where I'm like, I will keep all of this in world and not reveal things to my players. I think it was one of my biggest things growing as a DM was learning that secrets aren't all that valuable. You can keep 1 or 2 for really big bang for your buck, but for the most part, it doesn't matter as much as you feel like it will. People will still enjoy those things that happen. Ben's doing his disagreement.
No. I'm agreeing, I think, but keep going.
Interesting. Your pensive stance, we'll call it.
Like I said, I had a situation that is relevant to this discussion in the game that I played just on the weekend, and I played it a certain way that I think this discussion is kind of reframing it for me. I want to let you finish your thought first.
Right. The only other thing, so I'm a big fan of, keep talking to your players, keep telling them what's going to happen, let them know. I think, for example, if they're leading into a TPK and you want them to run away from something.
Yeah, sure.
Telling them as a DM, stopping and saying, just so you know, this is a combat encounter I designed to be deadly, like things like that. You don't have to tell them to run away because that's their choice, but, keeping up that conversation. But I also think in this specific kind of a scenario, it's really worthwhile. I like to call it like the Charmed loophole, right? Because Charmed as a TV show was really fond of creating sort of alternate futures, alternate universes. People turn evil, everything changes. And they always had some, silly way of reverting the world to what it was meant to be, right? So you can kind of remember you can have your cake and eat it too. You can have the big, exciting, dramatic surprise thing happen, and then after that, have a conversation with your players and go, okay, do you want to like play in this world? Do you want to find a way back? Do you want, where do you want the story to go from here? Which I think is particularly valuable because these scenarios often are things that one player can create, right? It's not even a whole party thing. It can be one player has the deck of many things or wishes on a monkey paw or whatever, right? And so being able to stop and have that discussion with the whole group afterwards without necessarily invalidating that specific story beat or story choice is good. You have control over the story, so you can wind it back if you need to.
Sure.
I think I've found a nice little middle ground for my voice right here. I'm very stoked about how that went.
Yeah, we just needed to warm it up a little bit.
I just needed to be less energetic.
No, it's that point that I got you enraged, and from there it clicked on. For me, it's a question of, and this kind of goes into many different weeds and areas, right? But it's a question of like immersion versus collaborative storytelling in some capacity. And this goes down to, this can be as major as like the entire world is going to change because of this decision. Or here is a literal fork in the road, and if you go left, you're going to go to a city that's going to be one campaign, and if you go right, you're going to walk into a wilderness and you're going to have a very different experience. And making it clear to the party that those are two big decisions. Like, you could wrap back around to the other if you wanted to. You could leave the city at any point, or you could try to find your way out of the wilderness at any point. But those are two different gaming experiences that you are going to have upon this sort of fork in the road, which boils all the way down to like, you're in a cavern and there's two tunnels in front of you, and which one do you choose, left or right? and making sure that you give enough information in that situation, ideally in world, that they at least are making a decision that's not just flipping a coin, that you smell something from one side and the other side you hear a faint noise, and it gives them just a little bit of a clue of what might be down those two tunnels without saying one side has a dragon down it and one side has a, prison or something, you probably don't want to be meta quite on that minuscule scale, I don't think, personally. But then when you blow that up and blow that up and blow that up and blow that up, the situation that I had in my campaign recently, and spoilers for at least one of my players who I know listens to this podcast, there's a monster in the Grim Hollow Monster Grimoire called the Pact Breaker. And this thing can smell when somebody has a pact with a greater being, a planar being. It's sort of the enemy of warlocks, if you will. And one of my players has a parasite. But their character they're playing is Pact of the Feet. No, I'm just kidding. They're Pact of the Parasite. So they have this otherworldly creature living inside of them. And the Pact Breaker has written inside their stat block, it can sever a character's connection with their patron so that they lose access to any power, spell, class ability, or feature, feat, whatever it might be, that comes from that pact. So it basically completely depowers a warlock, just turns their powers off completely, depending on what you interpret as being a direct result of the pact, I suppose. And so the party want to go visit the church, and I did this all in world, but they we really want to go inside this cathedral because we've got a cleric in our party and we've got other reasons for wanting to go in there, but they're not letting us pass because this Pact Breaker can smell the otherworldly being. It is stopping them from passing. And in world, I'm like, look, if you repent for your sins, then you can go inside the chapel. And what that meant was, if the Pact Breaker can break the pact and force the parasite out of your character, then you can go into the chapel, which is a huge decision. Completely changes how the character would play. But, do I want to flag that literally to the players, or do I want to do that entirely in world so they don't really know what the decision they're making is, And I went with the latter. I went with just the stern warning, repent for your sins. You'll have to, and they knew which character I was talking about as well. You'll have to, not be so sinful or whatever, was basically the way that I phrased it. But in retrospect, I think that this may affect your subclass, or this may affect the features of your class if you choose to do this, would have been fine to just give them that warning so that they could decide, oh, that sounds like an interesting conflict for my, personal conflict for my character to go through, or no, I like my character sheet the way it is. I don't want you to mess with it, so we'll go kind of do something else, Anyway, that's why this question kind of jumped out at me in particular, is at what point do you break immersion to tell the players literally what's happening so that they can make informed decisions about what's going to happen?
My answer to that question you just posed, when do you break character to pose a direct question to them? It's when will you be presenting something that breaks the established expectations of your campaign? Sure. And what I mean by this is, if your campaign up to this point had an extensive and consistent track record of messing with your players' character sheets, you take a grievous wound and you lose a limb, and that was an expectation that you either set intentionally way back in a campaign starting session 0, or the players had kind of gotten used to over the course of, 10 sessions of play or something, then they'd be like, oh, so there's something's going to happen here. This is less a game where I need to expect sort of game design decisions and more of a chronicle of weird stuff that happened to our characters. Then it's okay, well, heck, my Warlock Pact is gone. Time to figure something to do about that. Versus now, here's something that will affect your character. I know that has never happened before, but this is a major story decision that I'm allowing you to opt into or opt out of, right? I'm giving you player agency, not just character agency, but player agency over what's about to happen here.
Thank you for this discussion, including the chat as well. I was sort of, as everybody was talking, I was like, and then reading the chat at the same time going, As somebody said a moment ago, make sure to warlock your warlock.
Mhm.
All right, I think we've got time in this episode for one more quick email. Let's go to Lewis's email, or Lewis's question, who emailed podcast@ghostfiregaming.com. There's a bit in this question, but I think thematically it all kind of fits into the class discussions that we were talking about on a few episodes previously. Those questions kind of being like, is the fighter's archetype, narratively speaking, not necessarily mechanically, too broad? You know, should the barbarian and the monk and the paladin narratively be subclasses of the fighter, because they're all fundamentally fighting martial, the ranger included in this as well, classes that the description of a fighter could very easily encompass. And on the flip side, is the sorcerer's kind of narrative description not being served by the core mechanics of that class? They're singling out those two classes specifically, because when you think of the sorcerer, yes, it's subclass kind of, you get draconic scales, or you get chaos magic, or you get, storm lightning that erupts around you because you get your power from the storm. But the core class features don't really illustrate, this is a magic that is born from inside of you.
Well, mechanically, couldn't you have 3 classes? One that does not cast spells, one that does cast spells, and one that sort of casts spells? And then everything could be a subclass of that. Technically, you could do that. Mechanically, it works beautifully. And then you can have all of the different flavors of those 3 things work. Sure, you could do that. Could you have 27 different classes? Could you have 40 different classes? Yes, you could. Now, doing that would be difficult, but you could. It depends on the players and what the players are looking for in their specific game. You would get a rebellion if you tried to make, even I've said this, let's just make barbarians and monks fighter subclasses. Do I believe it? Today I do. Tomorrow I might not.
Sure.
Because depends on what you're trying to do with your game.
There are lots of games, both video and tabletop role-playing, which have narrowed down to 3 classes. In this case, often it's warrior, rogue, or mage, right? Mm-hmm. And they work perfectly well. The thing for D&D is that they are trying to create a different flavor and a different play experience that is in broader categories than just subclasses, but narrower categories than just warrior, rogue, mage. And it is interesting with D&D 5.2.11, that they have kind of re-signaled those kind of broader groups again, right? We've got the real narrowing down on the warriors and the priests and the what have you. But there is kind of this thing that they are trying to achieve in saying, there is somewhere in between, and we're aiming for that thing. I do think it is worthwhile pointing out, particularly classes like the fighter and the ranger often struggle when it comes to subclasses. It is difficult to come up with a lot of different subclasses for fighters, because at a certain point you're going, they're all doing the same thing, right? And I think that does show the more that we get, new books out where we're, delving into different themes, and the subclasses for those classes are really sort of running behind in a lot of ways. Meanwhile, you get the rogue, right? Which is still a very broad description that has really specific, flavorful subclasses that you can keep coming up with new things that are a rogue. So it's just a tricky thing. And so I'm never going to begrudge anyone for what level of specificity they choose for their classes rather than subclasses, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
They're all fun anyway.
Yeah.
Well, that's an interesting point you've raised there, Dael, because, it kind of seems like when your fighter description is guy who fights good, it seems like its lunch has kind of been eaten in terms of concept by things like barbarian and ranger and stuff like that those do feel like subclass options. And the only reason why they're not is because they came from a pre-subclass era. But now they've developed their own sort of archetype, and people like them, and they make for good class design. Whereas, rogue, so many ways to be, to fall into the category of a rogue, so many ways to be a thief or a scoundrel or a smooth talker. There's so many ways that you can part a fool from their money and their possessions. Way more than there are to just sort of beat a guy until they're dead. Also, I really gotta hand it to you, Lewis, to fool us into listening to your opinion and then discussing it. You'd make a very good rogue subclass, I say.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an interesting observation that, like, there's inconsistency between the specificity and the broadness of the different classes, and we know the reason a lot of these classes exist is really for, heritage reasons, stretching back to the game's beginnings, but also an inconsistency between how easy it is to think of new subclasses for each class, because, the ranger is reasonably well defined, and that might be what makes it difficult to think of new subclasses for it, because where do you take that concept that's not getting kind of a little higher concept than the original class? And the fighter's hard to build subclasses for, because either a subclass is better served by a barbarian or a paladin or a ranger anyway, and that concept's just so broad that it's like, that's what it does. It fights. That the core mechanics kind of serve, and the battle master kind of serve what that class needs to be almost in its entirety. I think the difference for me, the reason why I wouldn't put barbarian, paladin in particular, or ranger into a fighter subclass, and I'm also thinking about the Grim Hollow Monster Hunter, is because there's not enough room for new mechanics in a subclass for all the things you might want to be able to cover with that class. There's not enough room for second wind and rage.
When you only have room for maybe 3 to 5 features, how are you fitting it all in? Yeah, that's a really good point.
Exactly.
And we can see that because paladin, barbarian subclasses, monk subclasses are all really rich and flavorful. So clearly there's further room to drill down over there.
Okay, and then let's just quickly dive into Lewis sent a second email very quickly after the first, talking, I think this was based on our Gandalf discussion about what class is Gandalf, which has ignited hot debate on our YouTube channel, for the record. Noting, and I thought this was an interesting take on it as someone who has not read the Silmarillion, that Gandalf and the other Istari, many of them are technically pact breakers. Saruman very clearly, because he turned to evil, but Radagast didn't uphold the pact to oppose Sauron.
I would like to point out that they use the term Oathbreaker, not pact breaker.
Sorry, did I say pact?
Which supports my theory of Gandalf as a paladin.
To be fair, I meant to say Oathbreaker. I'm still, my brain is still in our earlier discussion. Anyway, Lewis asking, should there be more support for pact breaking in 5e? There is technically support for pact breaking in 5e, which is the, I'm saying pact again, for oath breaking in 5e, which is the Oathbreaker subclass, which is in the DMG. But even that Oathbreaker subclass is fairly specific to like an evil paladin who has fallen from grace. Is it possible to be an Oathbreaker and not necessarily have turned to darkness, but just not fulfilling your oath because, I don't know, other interests have taken over? Baldur's Gate 3 apparently is proving everybody an Oathbreaker if you've chosen the paladin class. Which launches into a discussion that we were kind of touching on earlier, which is like changing subclasses. Oath breaking from devotion into ancients if you suddenly, make a deal with a Fae. Changing your pact as a warlock if you betray your Fae master for a fiend. Retraining as a fighter if you spend, X amount of time in a fighting monastery learning the ways of archery instead of, battle mastery. Is this something that you've done in your games, or do you think it would be cool to have more mechanical support for how to change subclass or how to change entire class without just completely rewriting your character's sheet? What stats to keep and what stats to change over.
I made a video at one time that was half-baked concept of a pact burner warlock, right? And so my concept of this was a little bit like the transformations in Grim Hollow, actually. They were an inspiration for it. The idea that narratively, if you at some point break your pact with your warlock or, break your oath or whatever, you flip into a shadow subclass, right? Or a shadow class. So the idea with the warlock specifically was, you have this narrative that is pushing you to the edge. And at some point you have to choose, are you going to stick with your patron or are you going to turn on them? And when you turn on them, logically, you should lose access to a lot of your warlock-based abilities, right? To me, it read as a thing where it's like, how do you still have this ability if you are severed from your patron? But having said that, I don't want the player to suddenly lose a bunch of cool stuff. So I was twisting each of them into a version of it where you can use the knowledge that you were given against your patron. And so you get, special, if you were a Pact of the Fiend, for example, suddenly you have a lot of abilities that work great against fiends, right? And so I kind of dabbled in that a tiny little bit. And then Thomas Pinkham took that idea and ran with it. There's a piece that he's put up on the DM's Guild called the Pact Burner Warlock, where he just really took that concept and fleshed it out to the fullest extent, did shadow versions of every single warlock patron that existed at the time of writing, and filled it with all these tables of really cool, like the stages as your warlock patron is pushing you closer and closer to the edge of choosing whether or not to leave. And there's cool things like, I don't know, you go to a play and suddenly you see that the play is about you and you thinking of betraying your patron. And it's really, really moody, great stuff. So I highly recommend checking that out. Thomas Pinkham on DM's Guild.
I feel like you could do this with every class, right? You're the fighter and you have trained, every day you're out there working out. And now you decide to stay home and eat donuts. What?
It's like Thor in Endgame.
Exactly. Should we make a class of fighter who just gave up? Because I'm all about that. I think I could do a whole supplement on just that. Yeah.
Path of the dad bod.
Yeah, exactly. I'm writing that down.
Well, with that being said, if you want to email in like Lewis did, you can email, and Sasha for that matter, podcast@ghostfiregaming.com. If you've enjoyed this episode, if you're listening to us on an audio platform, we see you. We know you're out there, you loyal listeners, you. Feel free to leave us a review if you haven't already. We really appreciate all the 5-star reviews and 4-star reviews we've gotten. The 3-star ones, yeah. I'm kidding, because there haven't been any on Spotify and iTunes and those sort of places. We really appreciate that. If you're on YouTube, giving the video a like helps us get out to more listeners. We really appreciate everybody coming here. Those in the Twitch chat, stick around because we are about to go into our 100th episode, which we are recording in advance. And those on the audio platforms are going to have to wait till next week. But thanks for joining us. We'll see you next week. I've been Ben Byrne, here with Shawn Merwin, James Haig, Dael Kingsmill, and we will catch you in 15 minutes or in 7 days, depending on where you're listening to this. Bye-bye.
Oh boy.